Welcome to the Real News Network, coming to you from the McClatchy newspaper office in Washington, D.C. Last week, President Obama announced his plans for Afghanistan and Pakistan. Here's part of what he had to say.
So I want the American people to understand that we have a clear and focused goal: to disrupt, dismantle, and defeat al-Qaeda in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and to prevent their return to either country in the future. That's the goal that must be achieved. That is a cause that could not be more just. And to the terrorists who oppose us, my message is the same: we will defeat you.
Joining us to assess the Obama plans is Roy Gutman. He's McClatchy newspaper's foreign editor. He was the diplomatic correspondent for Newsweek. He won the Pulitzer Prize for his coverage of the 1993 Bosnia-Herzegovina War. His recent book about Afghanistan in the 1990s is called How We Missed the Story. He joins us today to discuss this Obama plan. Thank you.
Nice to be here.
So how do you assess the plan? Does he have a plan that's going to make some sense of Afghanistan and Pakistan?
Well, we don't know everything about it because it's an outline at this stage, but it's got the merit of being the first plan of its kind throughout modern history. In fact, even though the United States has been very involved in Afghanistan going back to 1979, they've never really had a strategy. And I think they have the makings of one now.
Well, certainly there was one strategy which, to a large extent, is the roots of the problem, which was the Brzezinski strategy of sucking the Russians in to a war and then I guess it's part of a plan for the U.S. to then walk away and leave Afghanistan in civil war, which leads to the Taliban and al-Qaeda and so on. But in terms of a strategy in any recent sense of the word, I guess is what you're talking about.
Well, and that's the problem that you just outlined. The U.S. approach that started in the Carter administration and was carried on by Ronald Reagan and blown into a huge, huge program was not a strategy at all. It was a tactical attempt to tie down the Russians and exhaust them, but it had there was no plan with regard to Afghanistan and its future. And so the walking away from Afghanistan, I don't think that was actually planned. It's just that they had no plan. And the fact is that every war, however small, if you want it to end, has to end in a political settlement. And if the United States is involved in stoking the war, it should stick around and make sure that it helps achieve a settlement.
Isn't part of the problem that Afghanistan, despite the rhetoric, is always seen either through a geopolitical strategic prism or a military prism? The issue of the welfare of the Afghan people and the actual development of Afghan society gets a little bit of lip service once in a while. Like President Bush, after the 2001 attack or invasion of Afghanistan, talked about something like a Marshall Plan, I think once or twice, and then the phrase disappeared, and then we certainly saw nothing like a Marshall Plan.
Well, that's the problem, that in general, people treat Afghanistan as a platform for attacking other problems, and they forget that there's 24 million people there, that it's a real country, real people. It's landlocked, it's poor, but it's in the heart of Asia. And it's surrounded by countries that are not an awful lot more stable than it is. And if you encourage the use of Afghanistan for attacking either the Russians or, in more recent case, the al-Qaeda people and the militants who fled, the Taliban who fled into Pakistan, but you ignore Afghanistan itself, if you don't put it at the center of things, then things are going to get worse.
Aren't you concerned that President Obama is doing exactly the same thing? And let me play you a couple of clips that illustrate what I'm talking about. Because perhaps President Bush wasn't the only one who raised the flag of a Marshall Plan and then kind of forgot about it. Here's the two clips.
Moreover, lasting security will only come if we heed General Marshall's lessons and help Afghans grow their economy from the bottom up. That's why I've proposed an additional $1 billion in non-military assistance each year, with meaningful safeguards to prevent corruption and to make sure investments are made not just in Kabul, but out in Afghanistan's provinces. As a part of this program, we'll invest in alternative livelihoods to poppy growing for Afghan farmers, just as we crack down on heroin trafficking. We cannot lose Afghanistan to a future of narco-terrorism. The Afghan people must know that our commitment to their future is enduring.
That quote was in July 15th, 2008, when Barack Obama was running for president. Here's what he had to say last week during his policy announcement.
So to advance security, opportunity, and justice, not just in Kabul, but from the bottom up in the provinces, we need agricultural specialists and educators, engineers and lawyers. That's how we can help the Afghan government serve its people and develop an economy that isn't dominated by illicit drugs. And that's why I'm ordering a substantial increase in our civilians on the ground.
It seems to me there's a long way from a Marshall-like plan and $1 billion a year of investment to build the Afghan economy from the bottom up, to more investment in some American expertise on the ground. The whole idea of a Marshall Plan and rebuilding Afghanistan seems to be off the table.
Well, I think the term Marshall Plan is used to the hilt by politicians all the time whenever there's a problem country out there. And it really, the original Marshall Plan, let's remember, applied to very developed countries that happen to have had a terrible war. Afghanistan's one of the least developed countries on earth, one of the poorest, and it's had one of the longest wars. It's really gone on since 1979, which is 30 full years. So exactly what you do in that situation, it's a tough haul because there isn't that much there to start with. They desperately need infrastructure. They desperately do need training. They need better links between the towns. They need safety and security. Putting a dollar figure on it may not be the end of the game, and it may not actually tell you that much.
But he did put in his announcement last week. He did put a dollar figure on Pakistan. He said there'd be a 1.5 billion a year investment in the Pakistani tribal areas. But it was quite a distinction: 1.5 billion a year in Pakistan and some expertise in Afghanistan, as opposed to what he said before, $1 billion a year.
Well, as I said before, this is an outline of a strategy. It is not actually the details of the strategy. We don't know precisely. A lot of money has been thrown into Afghanistan over the last 7 years, and quite where it's gone is a very interesting question.
Although most of the American money has gone into American military operations.
Yeah, but a lot has gone into development as well, and there are huge pledges outstanding from many, many countries who have not delivered on them. So it's a more complex picture than just simply a matter of $1 billion making all the difference. It wouldn't be enough, for a very long time to maybe $1 billion a month if it was well spent.
But from what you said earlier, putting Afghanistan at the center, like the objective here, he said it's very clear and focused, to use his words, and the objective is stop al-Qaeda from using this place as a base. The objective is not the development of Afghanistan. He just says you have to do some, seems to have some more specialists.
I think that's the subtlety of his message, in fact. He has put al-Qaeda at the very top of the list of threats there. But as a matter of fact, the collapse of the Afghan government, and he mentioned that, the fear of the collapse, is really the biggest fear, because right now al-Qaeda and the Taliban and other extremists have a base in the tribal area of Pakistan. But were the Afghan government to fall, then they would have all of Afghanistan once again. And that's a big country with a lot of space. So it may be that he's not actually saying it, but the essence of preventing that from happening means you must develop Afghanistan.
But he spends a lot more time talking about developing the Afghan army, Afghan police force. That's where, in most of the plan about Afghanistan, he spends most of his time. Paragraph that we just played for you, the clip, is all there is in terms of social development.
Yeah, you cannot really sell the American public on a program for Afghanistan and get very far, because for most Americans it is nowhere, and it's not going to ever matter to us. The truth of it is, it really does matter, and it is somewhere, but it's just one of these things. People have their eyes glaze over when you speak about Afghanistan, but it just so happens it's one of those places that really and truly matters. And so,
although it's interesting, President Bush helped justify the war in Afghanistan because he was going to go there to save Afghan women and girls.
Yeah, well, that was part of the BS of the Bush administration. He also said they were going to turn it into a modern democracy and a modern state, things that were vastly beyond anything that Bush actually intended to do or was doing.
If there isn't a major investment in the Afghan economy, Afghan schools, education, infrastructure. Do you think any military solution is possible?
Well, no military solution is ever possible. I mean, military solutions are fixes, but they do not stabilize the situation. And you've got to have a political agreement at the end of the day, based on the support of the public and a security system which can stabilize it. Right now, you don't have any of those things. But I wouldn't. But again, the Obama speech and the Obama policy now is to search for a settlement that will, in fact, bring in the Taliban. But there's no way to have a stable Afghanistan without the education, without the commerce, without the basic industry that they need. So, but the point is, by setting the goals as he did, he actually allows all these other things to happen as subsets of those goals. In other words, it does not exclude development by any means. I just don't think the details of the development plan are just not known.
Well, I guess when we see it, we'll assess it. As I said, at the moment, when you assess the speech, there's a lot more detail about development in Pakistan and Afghanistan.
Well,
it looks once again Afghanistan
okay.
will be a staging area for Pakistan.
Let's look at the reason for this. The tribal areas of Pakistan are undeveloped. They get very, very little government money. They are rough areas in the best of times. They don't have schools, they don't have roads for the most part, they don't have institutions, they don't have courts. It's a holdover from the 19th century that desperately needs to be improved on. And under the Bush administration, they were putting all the money basically into the Pakistan army and not into the development of these areas. So I think that what Obama is doing is actually getting to the heart of the problem. The tribal areas are, that kind of place is a place that hosts radicals very readily, because the government doesn't have any writ or any control or anything to offer them. So the U.S. in getting into the development business in this area actually is allowing, for the first time in a way, structures to maybe develop around which people can switch their loyalties to a government as opposed to the radicals who now hold sway.
One would think the same argument would apply to Afghanistan, and again,
well, it does.
We'll see. I guess we'll see.
But what you can't forget is that there are hundreds of non-governmental organizations that are now spending taxpayers' money on multiple projects there, most of which have not borne much fruit. And the big reason is because there has been almost no coordination from the side of the American government. No coordination among the groups as to what they're doing, and almost no coordination or limited coordination between the military's goals and the goals of security and the goals of development.
Yeah, the United Nations complains about that all the time. In fact, if you talk to, I've interviewed UN people in Afghanistan who say the Americans have simply not been interested in reconstruction. They say that's your problem, UN, or sometimes they say that's your problem, NATO, and we're here to fight Taliban. And reconstruction's been far down the list of the U.S. agenda there.
And that's exactly the problem, that the United States has not had an integrated strategy for stabilizing Afghanistan and for stabilizing Pakistan. I don't think that what Obama has stated this past week actually is going to convince a lot of people that it's the whole story, because it's not. But so far, the reactions from the leaders of both Afghanistan and Pakistan, and a lot of informal opinion as well, is that Obama has made a very good start. Look, as I say, it's the first strategy that the United States has ever had in the sense that it's followed a 6-month review. They've gone back and forth. They've looked at their priorities. They've looked at their money. They've looked at their goals, and they've come up with a strategy. First time in 30 years. So it's a start.
Thanks very much for joining us. And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.